Oh, it's going to this way. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Bible, but also the archaeology, Father, that proves that everything that you say happened through your word did in fact occur. Father, we're thankful for that hope that we have, and it's through your Son's name that we pray. Amen. Anybody recognize this quote? As for Hezekiah the Judean, I shut him up like a bird in a cage in Jerusalem, his royal city. That's Sennacherib. We're going to be in 2 Kings 19 today. We're going to go and turn there. The story that we're going to talk about is in 2 Kings. It's also in Chronicles. And this is also during the time which Isaiah is prophesying. So really the full story, there's a lot more to it than what we're going to be able to talk about today in each of those books of the Bible. We're only going to stay in 2 Kings 19, so we don't have to jump around. But if you have time after this, if this is something that you're interested in, I would go back and look at some of the other accounts, especially the Isaiah, as he's writing, that kind of talks about it from his viewpoint and what's going on from his side. We're going to stay in 2 Kings for most of it, so we can just go straight down the narrative. We think of Nineveh. What comes to mind? Jonah. What else? Yes, yeah. You might know, what was Nineveh the capital of? What great nation in the Bible? The Syrian capital. So what's very interesting, and this is an overshot of the site that is Nineveh, it's the archaeological site. You look at the mound, that's really the main part of it, but this is what would be the modern day city of Mosul, Iraq. It's in the same area along the river there, but it would have covered most of what you see here. It's a massive piece of land, and it is probably, at this time, we're going to talk about 700 BC time period, by far the largest city in the world, by far. It's not an exaggeration. I think that it may have been in the Jonah account that says it's a 3-day walk across the great city. It is a massive city. And what's very cool from the biblical standpoint is for a long time throughout history, people doubted whether the way the Bible talked about Nineveh was really accurate, whether it was true, whether the Assyrian Empire was really that great. It wasn't until the 18 or 1900s when they found Nineveh itself and started doing some of the digs that we're going to talk about today around our story, they realized that, man, this was probably the first great world superpower. You had Egypt, and they controlled a lot of the area, the cradle of civilization, as people call it, up until this point. But when you talk about the dominance and the power, which we're going to see today, Assyria is probably the first great superpower that we have. And this is the archaeological site from just a few years ago from the air. So it's a massive city on the Tigris River. When they were doing these digs throughout 18 and 1900s, they found massive palaces, the structures of them, they found the reliefs, they found rural inscriptions, they found the records from the Assyrian Empire. It is now one of the most well-documented ancient civilizations that we have. And again, it was rediscovered in the 19th century, really after centuries of doubt, whether this was really what the Bible made it out to be. One of the neat things, and this is going to be one of the main topics we talked about, is they found this throne room. And obviously this is a recreation, this is ChatGPT. They really just found the structure of it, the base foundation. But a recreation of it, this has been Sennacherib, the king of Syria, that we're going to talk about today. This has been a recreation of his throne room. And you see what they would do is they would recreate famous battles that they won along the side, and you have a throne. These are ancient mythological creatures that would protect them from ancient evil spirits. But it would have been colored like this, and it would have been the centerpiece for each of the kings of Assyria to showcase their most important victory. And this is going to be very important for the story that's about to come through in 2 Kings 19. The way the Assyrians operated is they were the first to really perfect technology to really lay total devastation to cities with advanced machinery, with siege ramps that you're gonna see, and they were pretty much an unstoppable force. They were undefeated until what we're about to come read about in 2 Kings in a moment. And they used this as propaganda to intimidate the subjected states that they would take over as their empire stretched across much of the modern day Middle East. And so when they were doing archaeological finds, they found a lot of the structures that would have been the palaces, but they also, and this is a view of what is actually, I think, in the British Museum. So what you saw in the previous slide, those colored panels all along the wall, is actually this today. They found them and they actually recreated most of what would have been that palace room. So you can still go see these today, thousands of years old. Very, very neat. And this is one of the pieces of the historical side from the Assyrian Empire that we know as they chronicle some of their major victories. But another thing they found, and this is called the Taylor's Prism, and the quote that I asked about to start off the class is found on this. So this is Sennacherib. So he ruled for a good time in the Assyrian Empire in the height. It was his father that carried away Israel, the northern kingdom, into captivity, leading up to the story we're going to talk about today. But this Taylor Prism, when they deciphered it, tells about everything that he did during his rule. And the key quote is what we read earlier: as for Hezekiah the Judite himself, like a caged bird, I shut him up in Jerusalem, his royal city. As for Hezekiah, the terrifying splendor of my majesty overcame him. Jerusalem, his royal city. Hezekiah, the king of Judah, is the centerpiece of the story that we'll get to in a moment. So this is Sennacherib's official campaign record. This is the Assyrian side of the story. We're going to read the biblical narrative, but we're also going to reference back to this and see how they line up perfectly. And it's very interesting as you get to the conclusion of the account in the Bible, how they go off, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So the cities that were destroyed, deportations, tribute that was paid, it obviously mentions Hezekiah in Jerusalem, and we're going to come back to this key quote when we get to the end of the lesson. Assyria as an empire, just a little bit more background before we go to 2 Kings. It's important to understand who we're dealing with. Assyria was a massive, or held a massive professional standing army. We've already talked about the advanced siege technology that they were able to deploy. When they would go on campaigns, it was always systematic destruction. It was a pattern. When a vassal state or a state that was under or indebted or in servitude to the king of Assyria, when they rebelled, every single time in history that we have recorded from the Assyrian side, the pattern was the same. They would go, they would destroy the city, they would remove the king, they would either kill him or carry him off into prison, they would replace a new leader into that city, and they would control the area every single time. Because what was happening, the Assyrian ideology is that the kings ruled by mandate from divine power. So the god of Assyria, literally the way he would present himself to the people and their religion was that this conquest was mandated by their god. So they had no other option as a king but to do these heinous things, to go to destroy, to conquer, and to spread the empire out as far as they could, because that's how they held power, that's how they held legitimacy in the eyes of the people, because it was a religious ideology. It wasn't really politics. To continue to control their kingdom, they had to do these things because the people and the king believed that it was by divine right. Any questions so far about the Assyrians? I know it's a lot of background, but it's going to be very important to understand how serious the Assyrians were, the way they acted, the advanced military they had, the advanced technology they had, and their normal practices. Because when we get to the biblical account, it's going to be very important that we understand how serious they acted when they would go on these military campaigns. So the big point that I want us to remember is the capital cities of the rebellious nations. When you would rebel against Assyria, the capital nation did not survive. Because again, the religious mandate from the Assyrian gods was for him to control and restore order, and that only was done ultimately by removing the power source and removing the figurehead of the rebellious kingdom and replacing his own ruler there. Capital cities never survived. They had to fall. Again, the pattern: countryside to be devastated, fortified cities destroyed, the capital be besieged, the king removed, and the victory would be proclaimed. It is the pattern over and over again when you're looking at historical records from the Assyrian people themselves.
Chad,
Yes.
well, I don't know, in a little bit, they were renowned for their cruelty.
Yes.
In fact, to this day, still considered one of the cruelest, if not the cruelest, conquering people
Yes.
that have ever existed on the face of the planet.
There's no mercy.
Yeah.
They were absolutely brutal, and that's what
Terror
really.
was their thing.
Yes, terror, fear, propaganda. They not only wanted to totally crush you, but they wanted to humiliate you and the people to make sure that if you were in rebellion, that it would not happen again once they regained power. There was no mercy. It was really, honestly, when you look at some of the records even outside of this, it's kind of sad when you look at the way they even documented and how proud they were of what they would do to people. And we won't even get into some of the details. It is very rough, and that's what I want us to really focus on as we move into this.
They were not
Never
supported by
mercy.
Boy Scouts.
Yeah, exactly. There's never mercy, never forgiveness. The cities would be destroyed in a very structured way, and the capital would never be saved, and the king was either usually publicly killed or until or carried off, never be seen again to restore order for the Assyrian god. Any other comments or questions? All right, let's go. We're going to read just a couple verses to set the stage of why this is taking place, why Assyria is coming after Judah. We're not going to go into the full background. I briefly touched on it a moment ago, but the northern kingdom has already been destroyed by the Assyrian people. All right, they've already been carried off. The northern kingdom has already experienced the might of the Assyrian Empire, and Judah, the southern kingdom, obviously has that recall, that memory of what they are capable of, and they have been in subjection to the Assyrian Empire up until this point. So just a couple verses before we get to the main passage. Somebody read 2 Kings 18:7.
And the Lord was with him wherever he went, he prospered, and he rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him.
All right, so what's happening here in the first part of 2 Kings 18, we didn't read the first half of this leading up to 7, but Hezekiah is restoring order and true worship to God. So he's restoring order, he's a rightful king and serving the one true God. And he, in verse 7, we find out, rebels against the king of Assyria and says that he's not going to serve him any longer. All right, so that's the background. Hezekiah restoring true worship throughout Judah, and he's rebelling against the king of Assyria, is no longer going to place himself under him. Somebody read, we're going back a little bit to 2 Kings 17:6.
In the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and led the people of Israel into exile to Assyria and settled them in Hala and Habor on the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes.
And somebody read verse 7. Go ahead and read the next part.
Now this came about because the sons of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up from the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared other gods.
Okay, so that sums up that the northern kingdom fell to Assyria. This was the father of Sennacherib, the king of Israel, the king of Assyria that we're going to talk about now. So Assyria comes for Judah, not because Hezekiah is righteous, but because he rebelled. And so what follows should be destruction. So Hezekiah restoring true worship. Israel is punished. Assyria is used as a vessel by God to destroy the northern kingdom for their unfaithfulness. Hezekiah, trying to restore true worship, is righteous, but he's rebelling against Assyria. So that's why the king is coming for him. 2 Kings 18. Somebody read verse 13 for us.
Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and seized them.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about this a little later, but we now get to the main character of the story. So you have King Sennacherib, the ruler of Assyria. We're gonna look at some maps in a moment, but Assyria is to the north of Israel and Judah. It is modern day Iraq in that area, and it would spread all the way down through Egypt over the next 100 or 200 years as the empire expanded. So Sennacherib is going to come for Judah because of Hezekiah's rebellion. Sennacherib, on this Taylor's Prism, when it says that all the fortified cities of Judah was destroyed, Sennacherib actually chronicles them and writes them all out. We won't go over every single one of them, obviously, but if you were to count them up, it's about 46 cities. And that's from the Assyrian side, from this Taylor's Prism that they found at the archaeological site. So up until this point, 46 cities have been destroyed. They're moving north along the west of Israel, and then they're going to come back around, as you'll see in a moment, up and turn their attention to Jerusalem. But again, what we've already talked about to this point, they're demolishing and obliterating everything that they're coming across. Okay, they're not leaving anything in their path, and they're claiming or going to try to claim total victory over the rebellious state of Judah. Any questions or thoughts on that first part? So what's key here is the Bible and the Assyrian account from their records agree on what's happening. The Bible that we just read says that he came and seized all the fortified cities of Jerusalem, of Judah, and then their account, the Taylor Prism, says that 46 cities were destroyed. Let's go on to the next part. So 2 Kings 18, verses 14 through 16. Somebody read that for us.
Then Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will bear. So the king of Assyria required of Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. Hezekiah gave him all the silver which he found in the house of the Lord, and in the treasuries of the king's house. At that time, Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord, and from the doorplate which Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. Then the king of Assyria sent Sarhan, Rabsaris, and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a large army to Jerusalem. So they went up and came to Jerusalem. And when they went up, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is on the highway of the full of the field. When they called the king Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, and Shebna, the scribe, and Joel, the son of Asaph, the recorder, came out to them.
That's good right there, Don. I was trying to save this from 1718 from the main, because I can't pronounce it either. So what happens, what does Hezekiah do to try to appease the ruler of Assyria?
He gives him all the gold and silver he's got.
Right, he pays tribute. And so this would have been the first step in what the king of Assyria had been looking for. And if you're kind of looking at the pattern of how they would go in and restore order, is they want the king to submit. But what's interesting here is this is different than what's usually going to happen when you look at the Assyrian historical record. So Hezekiah pays tribute, but he does not submit. And what I mean is the Assyrian Empire and the kings would normally require the king to come out in front of the people, and he would make a covenant with the king of Assyria to serve him. And this would have been like a divine covenant, like acknowledging him as his supreme ruler, his God, his overlord. And then that would have been the only way that the siege and the advancement of the Assyrian army would have stopped. But even after that, almost every single time without fail, that king, after doing that, being publicly humiliated, would have been killed or carried off anyways. So what you see is Hezekiah not submitting to Assyria and acknowledging or fleeing the true God by putting himself back under the Assyrian ruler as they would have expected, but he pays tribute to try to appease Sennacherib. Any thoughts on that? It's very important that you see that Jehovah God was not renounced. The Assyrians would have always wanted the local rulers to renounce their God and to fully submit to the Assyrian Empire and to their divine figures.
Seth,
Go ahead.
what I see here is, this is what the enemies of God always want. You know, you think you can pay them off. You think you can, give them most of what they want, give them a whole bunch of money and they'll leave us alone. No, they want absolute submission, absolute embrace of their will and their leadership. And it's a fight, and you either capitulate or you fight. Those are your choices.
And that still rings true today. It is a slippery slope. The moment you compromise your moral compass, your conscience, your religion, it's all downhill from there because they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop here, and the enemy's not going to stop today. Great point, Gary. Any other thoughts? So the verse that we just read says that they were in Lachish. So this is a city that is to the southwest of Jerusalem. So Sennacherib and his army have moved down. I'm going to show you another map in a minute. But this is Lachish today. And you'll see that when they did the archaeological dig, all these rocks and this ramp that is still there today, made by these rocks on each side, is the actual siege ramp that the Assyrian army used to go up onto the fortified part of the city, the walls, and destroy them. And it's very cool that that's still there today. And so when you just read that they were in Lachish, and then they moved up to Jerusalem to have these conversations, and the whole army is about to advance as well, this is where they were at. And Lachish is not going to survive. That's the siege ramp from the bottom. Again, those rocks, I had an estimate with probably 2 million rocks. And the way they would have done this is you have a couple 100,000 people in this army, and they are just quickly throwing rocks onto piles. And they're building this natural siege ramp up to the top to get to the walls. That's what that would have looked like. So this is the representation of Lachish, the siege ramp being built. They would have had their siege engines to take out the fortified walls as they advanced, and Lachish really stood no chance. Maybe 6,000 to 8,000 people in this city. Not a large number of men that have been in the army or the standing guard at this time. So if you think about the numbers that we're about to see when they advance on Jerusalem, Lachish would stood no chance to the might of the Syrian Empire. Any questions on that?
So this is a good illustration when you read the Old Testament fortified cities. Solomon had fortified cities. This is a fortified city, right? Most cities are not, but this is on top of a hill, big walls, hard to get to, easy to defend.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a really good representation of, what protection felt like, 3,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's very neat that they, even if you were to go back that slide, you still see like the built-up structures from the earth that they made to get to the top. Even this is probably built into the natural hillside. But yeah, to Gary's point, this is what a fortified city would look like. So when Sennacherib accounts in his Taylor Prism that he is going down and destroying all these fortified cities, and he's just laying waste to Judah. Any other thoughts? All right, now, so what's happening is the Rabshakeh is what we're about to read. It's just a word for like a field commander, the prince, who would have been one of the highest people in the army that Sennacherib had. He takes a group and he goes to Jerusalem to have this interaction with the people and Hezekiah. And so we're going to read 2 Kings 18, verses 19 through 25. Somebody read that for us, 19 through 25, 2 Kings 18.
Then Rabshakeh said to him, "Say now to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, what is this confidence that you have? You say that they are only empty words. I have counsel and strength for the war. Now on whom do you rely that you have rebelled against me? Now behold, you rely on the staff of this crushed reed, even on Egypt, on which a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who rely on him. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and has said to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Now therefore, come, make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria, and I will give you 2,000 horses, if you are able on your part to set riders on them. How then can you repulse one official of the least of my master's servants, and rely on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? Have I now come up without the Lord's approval against this place to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it.
So this is the leader of Sennacherib's army, just traveled from Lachish. It's an active siege right now. They're destroying it. They're burning it to the ground. We're going to talk about that more in a moment. But he's having this conversation with probably the people at the wall to take the message back to Hezekiah. Now, there's some key things we need to unpack because this is kind of heavy and it's a little bit hard to follow. I had to do a lot of reading on what was going on here. But in verses 20 and 21, the implication is that Judah, was relying on Egypt now. They've thrown off the Assyrian ruler. They had rebelled against him. So the implication from the conversation is that they probably are relying on the Egyptian power to potentially protect them. And to the field general's point, it's futile because you'll see in a moment that the Syrian army is going to also lay waste to Egypt. I mean, they're not going to be stopped. And so he's saying it is senseless to rely on this crushed reed, the Pharaoh king, to protect you because we're already going to deal with him as well.
Sir, if I may
Yes.
add something to that. I thought I remembered it some, but I looked it up to be sure. But this was the time when the Egyptians were being ruled by the Nubians.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So to trust, this is how ridiculous you get, in the midst of sin. Sometimes you think that something that you can lean on is still there, that isn't there anymore. The Egyptians that might have come and helped Israel weren't there anymore. They had been conquered by another.
Exactly.
So that's the whole set of pharaohs that had no clue who Israel, Judah was.
Yeah, that's a good backstory. Absolutely.
A broken reed.
Broken reed.
Broken reed, yeah. And so you're seeing in the Bible, and again, we talked about at the beginning, doubted, and so this is all confirmed thousands of years later, but lining up to what we actually have from historical records outside. Egypt is broken, you're relying on them, it's pointless and futile. We're going to crush them, continue to submit them, we're going to crush you as well. In 22, it shows a lack of understanding from the Assyrian people what Hezekiah was doing. Because we read briefly at the beginning of the class that Hezekiah is restoring true worship. And he is tearing down false altars to idols. He's making sure that the temple itself is restored. And so, without really a lack of knowledge, this Rabshakeh is throwing insults and saying, you're going to trust in your Lord, your God, but you're destroying all the places of worship to him. It doesn't even make sense. So it's a lack of understanding from that point of what was going on, what Hezekiah was doing leading up to this point. The 23 through 24 is mockery. It's hard to catch, but what he's saying is that we are so great and so powerful that we will give you 2,000 horses to come out and go to war against us if you can even find the people to ride horses. And saying that's how much we overwhelm you with our might, our power, our strength, our technology, is that we'll give you 2,000 horses if you can even find people to ride on them. And there's a couple of different interpretations on whether he's saying that in the sense that we'll give them to you and make war, we'll give them to you as like an appeasement for us to go away if you submit. But a lot of the commentaries I was reading says that this is really just straight mockery. That we have so much strength, we'll give you some of our stuff to use against us and it still won't matter. Very interesting. And then, probably the scariest part, if you're on the Assyrian side, this Rabshakeh, this field general, what does he say in verse 25? What does he claim?
Comes in the name of God.
What is that the definition of? Think about the commandments, what you're not supposed to do. What is this very definition of what this field general says here? Blasphemy, taking the Lord's name in vain, attributing something to God that ought not be attributed because it's false. It's a false claim. God has not given this person the authority to do that. He is just completely insulting and saying whatever he can to get a reaction out of the people on the wall and for them to take that message to Hezekiah. We're not going to read the rest of his speech here, but it's funny because he goes on to also say, and to blaspheme God in other ways and say that he can't protect you. So he also seems a little bit confused because he says ranting, because at first he says, I come to do this, and your God has sent me to do it. And a few verses later, which we didn't read, he says that God's not going to protect you for what I've come to do. So he's all over the place, just hurling insults and trying to get a reaction from the people here. But if someone would drop down and read this verse 30 of 2 Kings 18.
Nor let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, the Lord will surely deliver us, and this city will not be given into the hands of the king of Assyria.
Think about what's happening here. What is he saying? What's his point? What's he trying to do to the people here that are standing on the wall of Jerusalem, major fortified city? He's probably speaking up to them, telling them to tell all these things to Hezekiah. What's the point of verse 30? This is kind of a big connection, but it reminded me of the Garden of Eden in a way. It's the way evil works, and to Gary's point earlier, is don't trust in your authority, your righteous ruler, your righteous king that's trying to do right. Don't trust in him, trust in me. And these people would have no doubt already heard that the Assyrian army has come through and completely ransacked Judah, has had no mercy on people, currently in the process of destroying the Teach completely. And he is in the ear of those people saying, don't trust Hezekiah, don't trust your king, don't trust the person that's done right by you, restored rightful worship to God, treated you well, taken care of you, doing right by you. Trust me. And I've done all these evil things.
Trying to destroy whatever morale and.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very interesting. And common military tactics today, there are whole special operations groups, and they call it psychological warfare. That we still do this today in a very intense way to try to plant messages, to sow doubt, to sow discourse into the people that we're going into and trying to get whatever political outcome that we want out of that agenda. The same thing's happening here 2,000 years ago. Any other thoughts?
That was used extensively in the Second World War.
Yes.
Radio broadcasts and that sort of thing.
2 Kings 19, 1 through 7. Let's see Hezekiah's response. Let me read that for us.
Now when King Hezekiah heard the report, he tore his clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and entered the house of the Lord. Then he sent Eliakim, who was in charge of the household, with Shebna the scribe and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz. And they said to him, this is what Hezekiah says. This day is a day of distress, rebuke, and humiliation, for children have come to the point of birth, and there is no strength to deliver them. Perhaps the Lord your God will hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom his master, the king of Assyria, has sent to taunt the living God, and will avenge the words which the Lord your God has heard. Therefore, offer a prayer for the remnant that is left. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, and Isaiah said to them, this is what you shall say to your master. The Lord says this, do not be fearful because of the words that you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I am going to put a spirit in him so that he will hear news and return to his own land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own land.
Well, that's it. So we're going to have to briefly go over some of these last passages to get through the whole lesson. But remember, Isaiah is the prophet at this time. So Hezekiah seeks him for advice on what's gonna happen, obviously Hezekiah is very afraid from his reaction on what's going on here. And God reassures Hezekiah that deliverance is going to come about. And there's a lot of metaphorical language about how great a distress they're in the first part of the verses, but you get the picture of someone that's in an extreme state of emotional distress, worried about what's about to happen because of the great might of the Syrian army standing at the gates of Jerusalem. And he goes to Isaiah for help and to make sure that they're doing the right things to make sure that they're going to be delivered. So, someone read 2 Kings 19 verses 9 through 13.
Now the king heard concerning Tirkahah, the king of Cush, behold, he has set out to fight against you. So he sent messengers again to Hezekiah, saying, thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah. Do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you by promising that Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands, devoting them to destruction. And shall you be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them? Have the gods of the nations delivered them? The nations that my fathers destroyed, Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, and the people of Eden who were in Telassar? Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arpad, the king of the city of Sepharvaim, the king of Hena, or the king of Eva?
That's always tough. So, again, Hezekiah does not submit, and Assyria escalates and does not withdraw right here. So, briefly, what is the Reshekah recounting to the people of Judah? What's he reminding them of?
All the destruction he's done.
Nobody has ever escaped our advancement. Nobody, not one king, not one city, not one state, not one nation, they've all been destroyed. And the same thing's about to happen to you. Based on everything that we know we've talked about today, what should happen to Jerusalem? Leveled. Jerusalem should not survive this. The only records from the Assyrian people that we looked at in Taylor's Prism, the account in the Bible leading up to this point, from the mouth of Reshekah, the leader of the army of the Assyrian people, Jerusalem is about to be leveled. Without a doubt. The next part, we don't have time to read, so we're going to have to skip. Hezekiah goes to the temple and he prays to God. He lays out the message that was just delivered to him by the Reshekah, and he prays to God and gives it over to him, asking for deliverance. Let's read the Lord's response. 2 Kings 19, 32 through 34.
Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, you will not come to the city or shoot an arrow there, and you will not come before it with a shield or throw up a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, by the same he will return, and he shall not come to this city, declares the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake.
So this is what's happening. I told you we get to the map. So from the north, the Assyrian Empire is working down the western part of Judah and Philistia, and it comes down to Lachish. They've totally destroyed Lachish, and they turned their attention up to Jerusalem, where the events of what we just read has been happening. And so God responds and says, you're going to be delivered. Let's see how that happens. Verse 35 to 37.
Then it happened that night that the angel of the Lord went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the rest got up early in the morning, behold, all of the 185,000 were dead. So Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. Then it came about, as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that Adremelech and Sharezer killed him with the sword, and they escaped to the land of Ararat. And his son Esarhaddon became king in his place.
This is also documented, verses 37, the fulfillment of the prophecy that we read about a minute ago, that he was going to fall on his own land by sword. But it's also documented in the Assyrian account, so this is exactly what happened. So the Bible matches up again with the Assyrian account. Verse 35 is where we see the diversions. And this is probably the coolest thing, and it all culminates here. It's my favorite piece of archaeology throughout time. Because verse 35, we've already talked about the lead up to this. The Assyrian army are Super Bowl world champs, never been defeated, and they have destroyed the entire nation of Judah up until Jerusalem. And they have 185,000 people at the gate of Jerusalem, and they are going to take that city without a doubt. The angel of the Lord comes and wipes the floor, and the Assyrian army withdraws. Sennacherib returns to Nineveh, never to mess with Judah again during this time period.
Seth, when
Yes.
they talk about their record, nobody ever escaped them.
Yes.
This must be where that statement comes from, records are made to be broken.
Yeah, records are going to be broken, and it was broken here. This weird ChatGPT picture that I created that gives you just the sheer number of people, the Assyrian army around Jerusalem. And now, so I want to get back to the archaeological find that confirms this in a way because it's so important. We talked about this relief room in the palace of Sennacherib. So when he goes back, the relief that they find in his throne room is of Lachish. Why is that interesting? What did we talk about with the Assyrian people? What had to happen by divine mandate from the Assyrian gods when a rebel nation was in open rebellion?
Capital city had to be
The
destroyed.
capital city had to fall. It was a failure if the Assyrian army did not capture the capital city. But Sennacherib puts a relief of Lachish in his palace. And if you're looking at this, this is Sennacherib on his throne, receiving divine worship from his people. And the inscription, I don't have it up, but to paraphrase, it says Sennacherib ruling over his people and of the destruction of Lachish, where he commands all to be slaughtered, is the exact word. And so what should be here in his palace and his throne room should be what? Jerusalem. Why is it not? Because he did not capture it. And that is something that academic people from the atheist viewpoint, academic people from obviously the viewpoint of the Christian worldview know, they cannot explain it. To this day, people have been trying to understand why Sennacherib did not take Jerusalem and that he shrined and immortalized this Lachish relief in his palace. They don't have an answer because they don't want to turn to the Bible. And so as we sum up, we're out of time. The important thing I want everyone to come away with is when people question things in the Bible that seem outlandish, when people question, did that really happen? There are a lot of times great archaeological evidence, even if it has to be through a little bit of inference, that confirms what the Bible says. And so this is my favorite piece of archaeology that I've come across that shows that you have a very clear story being told from both the Assyrian side and from the biblical account that God did exactly what he said he did here, and he saved the people of Jerusalem. Any final thoughts?
So I think it's interesting that Sennacherib goes up to Jerusalem and he's mocking God that he brings forth all the nations that they've conquered and everything, and their gods could not save them.
But the one true God did save his people.
You got it. This was the beginning of the decline of the Assyrian Empire. The murder of Sennacherib by his own sons kind of sent him into a tailspin from there.
Yeah.
So it went, the insult hurled at God went much deeper than just their defeat at the
That's a great
walls
point,
of Jerusalem.
because you see the expansion of the full empire of Assyria, what was never touched? Jerusalem. And to Jose's point, after this account, they start losing control, start having issues with Medes, and then eventually Babylon, and Babylon would become the world power. Anything else?
Seth, what was this? What was this like? 625, 650 BC?
77, early 700s.
Early
like
700s.
701, yeah, or so, yeah.
Okay. Xenophon, the Greek historian, tells about a march where he's in retreat with this huge army, and they come to this city, and it's on the banks of this river, and he calls it a different city, but he described 100-foot high walls, completely empty, completely abandoned. It was Nineveh. 300 years later, complete. Nobody even knows what its name is.
That's cool. That's very cool. All right, that's it. Hey, thank y'all very much. If you have any other questions, we need to get to some of the other stuff, but I think we got the gist. I appreciate it for your comments.
Same here.